Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale, and you know what, everybody? It's just the summer doesn't give us time off. You think nothing's going to happen, Shane, and then everything goes down after we record our show last week.
Hey, not this time. We got it in this time, I think. We at least got a big piece of news.
All right.
There'll probably be more. I'm just saying.
Yes.
There'll probably be more, but at least we have the big news, or at least a big chunk of news. It's not going to drop right after we record this time. Hopefully.
Yes, that's good. That's good news. Well, first of all, let's preview the show. We have our friend JohnWallStreet, aka Corey Leff, who a lot of you have interacted with or seen on Twitter. He is a sports business pro with the Sportico platform. He will come on and explain all the realignment stuff and where Arizona is going to go, or his feelings on what Arizona should do. But before we get into everything else, Shane, and I'm going to make this separate from our usual buy or sell, the news just broke before you and I were recording this podcast that Kylan Boswell, the five-star point guard from 2023, just reclassified and will play for Tommy Lloyd's team this upcoming season. Now, we had discussed in buy or sell last week, was Arizona's roster done? You said it, you thought it was. I said I didn't think it was.
You had to bring that up, didn't you?
Yeah, I had to bring that one up. But seriously, though, your thoughts on the impact of Kylan Boswell on this year's Wildcat team?
I love it. It's hard not to, and it'll be interesting to see if he pushes Kirk Risa for the starting job.
Has to.
It's good competition, if nothing else. 24/7 Sports has him number 21 overall in the 2023 class. Number 4 overall point guard. Obviously, that'll change. He's going to reclassify to 2022. Arizona already announced it, so it's a done deal. So the number 2 overall commit or prospect in Arizona for 2023. I don't know how he would stack up in 22, but love it. It adds depth, if nothing else. Even if he's not a guy who's going to be a star right away, you never know. It adds another piece to a team that I think really needed it. I thought their transfers, the guys they added internationally, they're all wild cards. There are no sure things in terms of additions to this team, and Kylan Boswell is included. But the more of those guys you add, so they have 2 top 100 recruits, 2 top international guys, a couple of decent transfers. Now you start to build that out, and when you throw in the Adama Ball, who I feel like is going to be a big part of this team, I feel like he's almost like a new addition to the team.
Yeah,
and you add in Pelle Larsson, the experience he got covering Luka Doncic and for Team Sweden and playing overseas. I feel better about the season already. I mean, it's a great addition. We'll have to wait and see how much Kylan Boswell plays as a true freshman and how much of an impact he makes, but love it all the way around.
All right. Don't roll your eyes based on my past history with these type of things, Shane. I'm just saying that in 2024, the Final Four is in Glendale. Now, Arizona's team, assuming they don't lose anybody this year, should be locked and loaded and be one of the favorites, you would think, to be in that particular arena come March or April of 2024. I'm not telling you to book your hotel. I'm not telling you to buy your tickets. I'm just saying. You're
just saying you're going to do those things.
I'm not saying anything about me.
Uh-huh.
I'm just saying I would like to go to the Final Four as is. It wasn't my favorite experience in Glendale last time. They look like ants unless you sit, close enough.
Yeah.
I'm just saying if Arizona's there, I don't care if I'm sitting in the last row of the stadium. Just to be there, heck yeah. I just have a feeling. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. I'm really excited about this. I think this is great.
Folks, Eric had a feeling about the Rose Bowl the year Kevin Sumlin was hired. So just, many grains of salt. But
yes,
yeah,
thank you, Shane.
I know. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just, you started it by pointing.
I did. Yes. I deserve that.
But I mean, look, bigger picture, Eric, Arizona should be a Final Four contender more often than not. One of these years, they're going to get there. It doesn't seem like they're ever going to, but
it's probably not going to be this year. It's probably not going to be this year.
But look, you never know about that either, Eric. North Carolina almost won the whole thing as an 8 seed. You get in the tournament, you never know. I don't think they're going to be a top 4 or top 8 team this year, but you get in the tournament, it's a crapshoot. It really is.
Yes. So this is great news about Boswell. Really excited about that. Thank you, Kylan, for doing this before Shane and I recorded our podcast.
Thank you, Kylan.
Yeah, because we finally needed something to break. All right. Buy or sell this week is going to be primarily about the realignment talk. So let's get right into it. This is Buy or Sell, presented by our friends at Ice Shaker. You can go to iceshaker.com and get one of these awesome Wildcat Country ice shakers. Use promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C, and get $5 off your purchase. And as we say every week, these are the real deal.
And by the way, Eric, our guy Scooby Wright, USFL champion Scooby Wright, Mr. Pick Six, Shark Dog,
Scooby.
Loves his ice shaker.
He does.
So follow us on Cat Country AZ and find out more.
Yeah, follow us, Cat Country AZ. And thank you to those of you. Somebody asked on Twitter, what's your favorite Arizona Twitter feed? And I saw somebody, I don't remember who it is offhand, put Cat Country AZ. So thank you for doing that. If you're listening to this podcast, we appreciate that. All right, Shane, number one, let's get right to it. Buy or sell the Pac-12 after USC and UCLA?
You know what? A few days ago, I would have sold it, Eric. I thought that it was done. I thought it was finished. I thought all the teams would splinter off into the Big 10 and Big 12 or into the abyss. Who knows? Or quit playing football together. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm feeling a little better about it now. And part of it, and kind of a tease to our interview with Mr. JohnWallStreet. But it sounds like the Pac-12 is, which will soon be the Pac-10, if nothing changes in a couple of years, is intent on staying intact. Now we'll see what that looks like. They lost the number 2 market nationally in Los Angeles. That's massive. That's absolutely massive. And I know some mid-major schools have already reached out about possibly joining the Pac-12. And I'm not sure how much value that brings. We'll ask Corey about that as well. But at this point, it's crazy just how quickly things change because, we recorded last week, like you alluded to, we recorded right before the USC and UCLA announcement was made official. At that point, I'm thinking the Pac-12 is done because then you start hearing rumblings that Oregon and Washington might not be far behind. And then, Arizona is going to join the Big 12. All these Pac-12 schools have had discussions with the Big 12, which our guy Corey says has not happened. And I believe him. He's plugged in. So at this point, I think the Pac-12 will survive one way or the other. I'm not sure what form that's going to take, but I think that they might see their way through it. And if George Kalafkoff can pull it off, considering the hand he was dealt when he came in, he's a miracle worker, really. Yes,
I agree with that. Now we'll talk to Corey and get more info, but as of now, Shane, I am selling the Pac-12 or Pac-10 without the LA schools. You can't lose that big of a market. I think that Oregon and Washington eventually will defect. And I think that the Big Ten will eventually take them on. And I just, barring a Hail Mary, I just don't think this conference as it stands now is appealing enough. Now, we'll talk about some of the other rumors that we've heard more in this segment, but as it stands now, I don't think adding San Diego State, UNLV, SMU, Boise State, that doesn't move the needle.
Those aren't needle movers at all.
I mean, when you think of Arizona, USC, Arizona, UCLA, I look forward to at least one of those home games every year. That is devastating to lose that. There is no other way to say it. If I was Arizona, I would probably get out of this conference.
On a personal level, Eric, it's going to be a real shame to not see Arizona and UCLA play basketball twice or 3 times a year. I love that every time UCLA comes to Tucson, regardless of the records, the rankings, it is a big game feel. Obviously, last season it was huge because both teams are very good. But even when they're not, it's a close game. It seems like every time it's one of those rivalry games. And if that, obviously it's going to, if it continues, it'll be in like some home and home format, but it's not going to be 2 games a year. And that's really a shame.
But Shane, if you want to look on the bright side, without those 2 schools in the conference, Arizona will be the favorite to win the Pac-10 most years.
Yeah, I know, but I would rather get that experience against good competition. I don't want Arizona to turn into a Gonzaga in that respect.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, this conference, you could argue that the basketball conference of the West Coast of the WCC might be more attractive some years than the Pac-10, which is not good. Okay, number 2, buy or sell Arizona to the Big 12 eventually.
For the same reason that I bought the Pac-12, I'm going to sell the Big 12 because it sounds like that's a, and again, I don't, we're going to talk to Corey about a lot of stuff. So I'm not giving away the farm here, but just, we rely on him and his sources. And he's saying that's not likely to happen at this point, or at least it's a fallback option. And one of the reasons for it is, and this is something that John Canzano reported, the ACC's TV markets include roughly twice as many households as the Big 12 does, 28 million to 14 million, about there. So, I think it certainly makes sense to pursue other options first. If anything, I think that maybe you'll see I was thinking, the Pac-10 schools might join the Big 12. Now I think if anything, it might be the other way around. Of course, a lot of moving parts, a lot of dominoes to fall, but I think that this partnership with the ACC in whatever form it's going to take, and I think we just learned more about that possibly recently. I think that seems more likely at this point than the merger with the Big 12. And again, that is different. I feel differently about that than I did a few days ago.
All right. The reason I would buy Arizona, the Big 12, your recruiting base of California and Southern California, especially, is kind of out the window because you're not going to be playing one game there every year. Like you have been for the past, 40 years, something like that. Now things are a little bit different. You need your new recruiting base to be that Texas area and go get those kids out of Texas.
They've done well in Texas in the past. You remember Mike Stoops did great recruiting in Texas.
Right. But you're not going to Southern California, but you would be going to Texas every year and playing games. That's why I am all for the Big 12. It has nothing to do with playing Kansas in basketball. It's about recruiting. I mean, we're just talking football here. Basically, nobody cares about basketball with these discussions. Basketball isn't mentioned because
which is unfortunate.
Is unfortunate. Let me explain to the basic, listener, those of you listening, why basketball doesn't matter. Think about a sold out Arizona stadium, 7 games a year. That's 50. Let's say 50,000 people times 7. That's 350,000 in attendance. You think about a sold out McHale Center, 15 times a year, and that's 12,000 or let's say 14,000. I mean, you can't even compare. So, it's in terms of math, a sold out McHale Center in this argument is 210,000. Football is 350,000. That's a significant difference.
Well, that's part of it, Eric. But I think the bigger picture is college football is just more popular than men's college basketball. It's the second most popular sport in college athletics. But I think it's a distant second. Football is,
but it's the money. But look at the amount of revenue. If all tickets were priced the same, but if all tickets were priced the same, well, right, you're talking about TV deals as well.
Yeah.
Ratings, but
all matters.
Yeah, but that's why an athletic department cares more about football in terms of the tickets sold for their athletic department.
Sure.
Obviously the TV deal that the conference gets part of. Yeah. Okay, so that's why I think the Big 12 would be a good move for Arizona. We'll see if Corey agrees or not. Number 3. So the ACC partnership, I read a rumor that rumors going around today, Wednesday, when we're recording this, that basically the goal would be to have, ESPN take over kind of the partnership and Arizona games, or Pac-12 games being played on this ACC channel, whatnot. And who knows what that'll look like. And we'll probably talk about that in the coming weeks. But the big key would be to have a game after the Pac-12 and ACC championship games of the two winners meeting each other in a separate game. And that would generate more money for both conferences. So therefore, I asked Shane, this proposed Pac-10-12 partnership with the ACC, buy or sell?
Yeah, it certainly makes a little more sense now. When you think partnership, what does that mean? You play each other once every 3 or 4 years, something like that might make sense, especially as the college football playoff evolves, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
The Pac-12 has been left out in the cold more often than not with the college football playoff in its current format. You'd have this kind of game, and maybe you're more likely to get a school in there. I think that makes sense. I think a partnership with the ACC and using that as an opportunity to bring aboard, like John Canzano suggested, maybe Baylor, Kansas, OK State, Houston. I think that makes more sense. So I think if you're going to have a partnership where it's going to be real partnership as opposed to whatever was proposed, like that 3-way thing that was proposed between the ACC, Pac-12, and Big 10 years ago that never really meant a damn thing. Something like that, I think would make more sense, especially if the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 is hell bent on preserving that conference. I think that would be the best avenue to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to ask Corey about this before I buy or sell anything with this ACC Pac-12 partnership. One thing I do like, the fact that based on the rumors that the Pac-12, that these teams would play an ACC team every year. Great.
Yep.
The basketball scheduling would be very interesting.
Oh yeah. Imagine.
But yeah, I mean,
get Duke or UNC back in McHale.
Oh, I mean, that would make up for you losing UCLA and USC for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to hold on this one. I want to see what Corey has to say, and then we'll talk about
this. This is not buy, sell, or hold, Eric. This is buy or sell.
All right, small buy.
All right,
I guess
small
buy.
I'll whatever. I'll let you off the hook. Let's move on.
Yeah, geographically, I don't love it, but that's fine. I guess geography doesn't matter anymore. UCLA playing Rutgers, I guess, doesn't matter. Okay, the bonus question of sorts: Arizona to the SEC or Big Ten? Would you buy even a remote possibility of this ever happening?
Remote, sure. Likely, no. I'm going to sell it. I don't think either of those happen. I think maybe the SEC just like it becomes this big blob that absorbs everything eventually. But even if that were to happen, would they want Arizona? Would they want Arizona State? I don't know. So I'm going to sell that. I think that's probably the longest shot. And again, not someone with sources like our guy JohnWallStreet does, but just, I just ask myself what makes sense and what doesn't. And often I'm wrong about these things, very often, but I think ACC is probably, that partnership is probably most likely. Big 12 somewhere in the middle, and then SEC maybe down the line. If that happens, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
I just want to throw that out there. I know people are talking about the craziness. Oh, maybe Arizona will join the SEC and Arizona could join the Big Ten. I don't think those conferences want, unless Arizona wins 8 games this year in football and shows that they're, over the next few years are a powerhouse. I can't imagine. Maybe under Rich Rod, but right now Jed Fish has to prove a lot. So, all right. This was kind of a different kind of buy or sell because we focused on one topic, but, and it was kind of incomplete in that Corey's going to fill us in here in the next segment on a lot of things. So we'll recap it in the final segment, but coming up next, it is Corey Leff from JohnWallStreet here on Wildcat Country. Scooby, we sent you an ice shaker. They are a sponsor, courtesy of our buddy Chris Gronkowski. You have it right there.
I love my ice shaker. Fun fact: when I trained with Glenn Gronkowski, everybody, when we were trained together, people thought I was the other Gronk brother. So it's kind of funny. But yes, I love my ice shaker. It is very good. I use it every day. I am a veteran to the ice shaker game, by the way.
What's up, Wildcat Country? Chris Gronkowski here. Use coupon code Wildcat Country at iceshaker.com.
All right, Shane, as our only guest this week, we are very pleased to welcome the guy that is tearing up Arizona Twitter right now, the guy that's getting the fan base all out of whack because he knows things that he can't even share with us. He just has the inside scoop, and that's JohnWallStreet. You can find him at JohnWallStreet on Twitter, but it's our friend Corey Leff, who is JohnWallStreet. Corey, glad to have you here. Once again, you're a U of A alum for those of you, for those people who haven't listened to the podcast and heard you before. You and I go back a long ways. You have incredible sources into this whole realignment thing. The number one question for you, let's get right to it. In 2 years, which conference, in your opinion, does Arizona play its sports in?
I think there's a hope that the Pac-10 conference or the Pac-12 conference, whatever you want to call it, is the hope. I think that there is still a belief that amongst the Pac-10 schools, we'll call them the Pac-10 schools because SC and UCLA are no longer even in these conversations, right? So meaning like they're not even in the room. They're just going to play games for the next 2 years. So we're really talking about the Pac-10 here. And there's a kind of a consensus among those schools that if they remain together, they remain the third strongest conference among the Power Five. And I think there's a belief that there will be at least 3 power conferences, perhaps 4, when this round of realignment shakes out. So I think that the Pac-12, the Pac-10 schools would like as a first option to remain together. And that likely includes some semblance of additions. And where the conversation has gone today is, as I reported yesterday, it's unlikely to be additions from the Big 12. There are very few, if any, schools that the Pac-12 believes would be value additive. Oklahoma State is the lone exception. I think perhaps you could convince people Baylor and TCU bring some value as well, but Oklahoma State is really the one prize, if you will, left.
What about Kansas though? Basketball, Kansas.
Yeah, good point. Kansas basketball is great. Kansas football brings less value to the table than probably any other Power 5 team, or very close to it. And certainly that includes Arizona. So, I don't think Kansas brings a ton of value there. I think that Oklahoma State is the one school that would be attractive if we were looking to add on. Now, that brings you to the conversation today, which is, well, maybe there's some sort of tie-up to be had with the ACC. I like the idea. I'll be honest, I do. I like the idea of keeping the Pac-10 together. I like the idea of strengthening it. And if that means some sort of collaboration between the Pac and the ACC, where perhaps the winner of those two conferences play for, a conference championship game or something like that, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued about football games against Clemson and Florida State, basketball games again, even though that's not driving the conversation, but basketball games against Duke and Carolina. So I like the idea. Where I get kind of hung up on that idea, though, is if you are going to reopen right now, the ACC schools are kind of stuck because their grant of rights runs through like 2036. And so they don't have a ton of options. But if the conference agrees to reopen that grant of rights to negotiate with the Pac-12, the question is, does that leave an opportunity for the likes of Clemson and Miami and Florida State to secede to the SEC or somewhere else? Now, the SEC has said they don't want any other teams, so there might not be a home for them there. But, I think for the Pac-12, if you're going to go down that route, you have to be sure that not only are your schools, Oregon, Washington at the top of the list, maybe Stanford to the Big Ten, that not only are they committed, but you got to be sure on the other side that the ACC schools are equally as committed. And you got to be convinced of that. Now, that I think that's the pie in the sky. Well, let me rephrase that. That's not the pie in the sky. I think that's the feel-good scenario, right? Like, we can keep the Pac-10 together, we can keep that tradition history, we can remain the third conference. And remember, at the end of the day, this is really all about maintaining a seat at the table. And if that were to happen, if the Pac-12 and the ACC teamed up, there would no doubt be a seat at the table for those two conferences combined. Now, if the second option in 2 years is the Big 12, right? If Oregon and Washington somehow find their way to the Big Ten, and it looks like the Pac-12 is going to really go by the wayside, then you're looking at the Big 12 as a fallback option. There's certainly a home there for Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. I don't know that it's not a great option. I think the Pac-12 schools generally look at the Big 12 as a step down. But it is an option. And again, if you added the Arizona schools, the Mountain schools to the existing Big 12 conference, I think you can make a strong argument that is the third best conference ahead of where the ACC is. So again, maintaining that seat at the table is the most important thing. And so I could stomach both of those two outcomes. The pie in the sky best case scenario, in my opinion, is we get to, and both of those contingencies are kind of under the presumption that the existing conferences remain at 16 or less teams. Now, if we get to a point where the Big Ten decides to add Notre Dame, the Big Ten, now they're at 17. Maybe they add Washington and Oregon, now they're at 19. Then you look at the SEC, probably looks to counter. They go and add Florida State and Miami and Clemson. And all of a sudden you're at 19. And now it's become kind of an arms race between these two conferences, which, by the way, is inevitably where this goes. And the question is, does it happen now? Does it happen when the CFP gets renegotiated? Does it happen when the next round of media rights negotiations? So let's talk, a decade out. We're going down that road, and we're going down that road because ultimately, if you have the two power conferences and they can negotiate a media rights deal together, then you could generate more revenue, right? Right now, the networks can choose between the various conferences. If there's just one collective, there's only one place to get college football, you can maximize your value. So if we go down this route where the Big Ten and the SEC are kind of loading up, then I think there all of a sudden becomes an opportunity for perhaps a West Coast division of the SEC. And I talked to one very prominent member of Arizona's athletic department today who said that would be his ideal solution. And the conference would look something like Texas, Oklahoma State, which would get picked off from the Big 12, which you would obviously team up with Oklahoma, and A&M. That gives you your 4 from on one side, and then you would add the Arizona schools, Washington and Oregon, under that solution. So that's your kind of your 8-team West Coast division of the SEC, if you will. Under that solution, Colorado and Utah probably end up in the Big 12. I don't know what happens. Stanford maybe goes to the Big 10. I don't know what happened. Maybe they take Cal along with them. I doubt Cal folds football. There was some speculation that Cal could end up folding football if they get kind of left on the outside here. But it sounds like their alumni will ensure that Cal continues to play. So, like I said, maybe they go with Stanford to the Big 10. But I think those are the 3 options, right? I think we either stay in the Pac-10, which I think is probably the most likely scenario, and that's probably includes a tie-up with the ACC. I think the Big 12 is certainly the fallback. And then if everything kind of hits the fan, the SEC, I think that's where everybody would like to go. I think if the SEC offered a bid, certainly if the Big 10 offered a bid too, we would take it. But I think there is a feeling, at least among some parties, that makes sense to have that West Coast division. And culturally, I think we could add some value to the SEC as a AAU school. We could bring some value in a growing state, obviously. So there's a couple things that we could bring besides the basketball program, which is not going to carry a ton of weight in their eyes.
So, Corey, how likely are we to see some movement in one way or the other in terms of announced partnership with ACC, Big 12 schools joining the Pac-10, or the other way around? How likely is this all to come together? Are we talking years here?
That's really unknown. I don't have a great answer for you because I think it could take years, right? It could be until Notre Dame makes the next move, until Notre Dame decides if they're going to go to the ACC or the Big 10. Everybody kind of sits tight and waits for that move because there's rumors that the Big 10 isn't going to move until they know what Notre Dame is doing. So it's possible that we are done for right now. I'm not convinced that's the case. I think everybody is still talking to everybody and trying to figure this out. I think, but you're probably going to see a bunch of this shake out between now and 2025 when the CFP is expanded. Like, I think that is probably like the next major catalyst for change.
So how confident are you, Corey, that because all the discussions of Arizona being a part of this move, whether it's the ACC partnership, Big 12, whatever, is there any chance in your mind, just based on what you've heard, that Arizona maybe gets left out in the cold out of all this? Just because their football program, it's been trashed the last few years. And it's not a big revenue driver. Basketball is a different story. By no means, basketball is very secondary to football in terms of revenue. Any chance that Arizona gets caught? I mean, you understand what I'm trying to say? That it doesn't end up in a power conference.
Yeah. Listen, I think we're going down the road, and we can flush this conversation out in a minute, of getting to one kind of super conference, kind of super league idea where the Big 10 and SEC at a minimum have some sort of merger or some sort of tie up. And at that point, schools are going to get left out. And that might include existing SEC and Big 10 schools. If you're Vanderbilt, if you're Mississippi State, if you're Rutgers or Maryland, and you're not bringing a lot of value, the schools like Michigan, Alabama are going to say, well, why are we bringing these guys in? And if we're going to do away with the conferences or that's a whole kind of other, bucket of worms, if you will. But I think I think we're fine for this round, to be honest. I don't think I have a hard time seeing a scenario where Arizona isn't included in this round of realignment. Like I said, I think there's a good chance the Pac-12, the Pac-10 stays together and actually gets stronger. I think that in a worst case scenario, there's a home waiting for us in the Big 12. But either way, I can't see a way we're not in at least the third best division. And like I said, perhaps there's a chance we get to the ACC, or excuse me, to the SEC, and then you make the argument that we're in the best conference.
Can you clarify? I'm sorry, Claire. Can you clarify why the Big 12 is not as an attractive an option? Is it partly because the TV markets? I know, like John Canzano reported that the Big 12 only reaches about 14 million households. The ACC doubles that. Is that the biggest reason there?
It's not. That's one of the reasons. TV markets were much more important the last time around when we were talking about conference networks. Conference networks are a much smaller part of the conversation this time around. And so TV households aren't as important. With that said, all being equal, LA is going to be more valuable than Eugene, right? So,
Sure.
But I think what's really driving this is brand value. And the truth is the Big 12 just really doesn't have a ton of brand power. Ultimately, and the story I wrote today, this is about automatic bids and expanding CFP, right? And the more powerful brands that you have, the more you'll be able to command a automatic bid, and that's really important for really everyone other than the SEC. The SEC doesn't really care if there are automatic bids because it knows its top team is going to be one of the top, 8, 12, 16. It probably thinks its second and third team are going to be part of that 8, 12, or 16 also. But if you're even the Big 10, which wants it, if you're the Pac-12, if you're the ACC, if you're the Big 10, the Big 12, you need to have that guaranteed seat. We've seen it over, time and time again with the Pac-12. We've been left out of the postseason. And what's going to happen is these media rights negotiations are only going to be as valuable as your access to the postseason. So if you don't have a guaranteed bid to the postseason, and there's a potential you can get left out, your TV contracts certainly aren't going to be as valuable. So the Big 12 doesn't have as strong of brands. It doesn't have as strong of markets. It doesn't have as strong of academics. There's not a ton to love, outside of the basketball, kind of schedule that we would play. I don't think there's a ton to love about the Big 12.
Yeah, but wait a second, Corey, hold on. When you talk about the SEC, you said that's your dream scenario. Put yourself in the Arizona athletic director Dave Hickey's shoes, or Bobby Robbins, whatever. You go to the SEC, you're not winning anything in football ever. Like if you make a bowl game and win 6 games, the coach is getting a statue on campus. That, I know you'll make more money with the TV deal, but that seems like a disastrous scenario for Arizona from a football perspective.
I think you can look at it the other way. I think if you're in that conference, you have a real chance to compete. If you play in the third conference, your resources we're going to be trying to compete against those same schools, albeit not in the same conference, but you're competing against them for playoff spots, and ultimately you would be competing against them in the playoffs. And with less resources, there's going to be less talent, and we're going to struggle to win those games. So I think if you get into the SEC, the conference schedule is going to be brutal, but at least you have the resources to compete. And listen, I don't think that the schedule would be brutal as it looks today.
Terrible.
But I don't think we're playing with the same deck of cards today as we would be playing with if we get into that conference.
All right.
Now, with that said, I think that this season is really important. Assuming that this doesn't all shake out here in the next couple of weeks, months, there's going to be pressure on football to win some games, because we want to be positioned as this up and coming program. Because you can look at Arizona and say, well, what value does Arizona bring? They won 1 game last year. They won 1 game in 3 seasons, or whatever the stat is. But all of a sudden, if we're 5-7, 6-6, and we're on an uptick, now there's a much stronger case to be what we are as a football program, I think.
Yes.
So I think, as this stuff is in flux, winning games takes on an increased importance.
All right. So let's talk about a TV deal from the Pac-10's perspective. Let's say they don't add, they just stick with the 10 schools that are there now. Do you think it is beneficial for them to go with an Apple or an Amazon, who, while you may not have the distribution over the air, will probably pay a lot more money than any other TV partner would give this conference?
It's a really good question. And it's like the $1 million question, right? Like, do you take the
Literally.
money or do you take the money or do you want the exposure? In professional sports, I tend to lean towards the exposure because it's really hard to build the fan base if you don't play on television, the next generation of fans. I think it is a little bit easier to build the next generation of college fans, if only because people have an affinity to their school naturally. And so if it's all about dollars and cents and we need to try to keep up, because again, we're talking about we need to keep up with the SEC and the Big Ten, or at least try to keep up. The further we get in terms of revenue, the harder it becomes to win games. So if, I think you probably look at a situation much like what MLS just did, where they take a deal that has a bigger kind of upfront cash component. There's certainly some incentives, over, an extended period of time, a 10-year period or whatever. And I think you go down that route. If we're stuck at 10 teams, if there's no tie up with the ACC, but I think in an ideal world that I have a hard time seeing a scenario where the Pac-12 is where Pac-10 is 10 teams, the Big 12 is at 12 teams, the ACC remains as is. Like, I just think that there's going to be more movement before this round is over.
Last question for you, Corey. We appreciate you being the wealth of knowledge that you always are, and sharing that with some of us. Another thing I read, and I want to see what you're hearing about this, if anything, is that number of mid-major schools have reached out to the Pac-12 about possibly joining the conference. 3 that were named: Boise State, Fresno State, SMU. Heard anything about that? And just your overall thoughts on what that would that benefit the Pac-12 long term?
I don't think that there's any scenario where the Pac-12 takes those schools. When the conversation I had yesterday, when we mentioned expanding schools, the first thing that was said was, and I'm not talking about Boise State. I don't think if we can't find value, the Pac-12 conference, the Pac-10 conference can't find value in the Big 12 schools. You're not going to find the value in Fresno and Boise and I forgot who the third one you said was. But
I said SMU. That was just
SMU.
The 3 of the schools that were mentioned. I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, I don't think that we go down that route at all.
San Diego State's another one. A little bit bigger market. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I think that they would look to the Big 12 schools first. And like I said, I think I'm not convinced that the Pac-12 schools see enough value there.
All right. A few last ones for me, Corey. People on Twitter will ask, well, your sources. Now, obviously, you're not going to give out your sources, but how good are your sources in this particular situation? Just so people, in terms of establishing credibility, Shane and I know that you have really good sources, but what can you tell our audience about the quality of those?
That's kind of what JohnWallStreet has built, a really influential audience. And that audience has allowed me to have access to the most influential people in sports. So, I would consider the people that I'm talking to be very in the know. These aren't consultants and kind of third parties. These are people in the room, and people that have been in the room along the way. And typically have a pretty good pulse on this stuff. And, part of the reason why I don't give up the sources is because I try to protect those relationships.
Sure. Yeah. And last question for you. And of course,
and by the way, this is very sensitive, right? And it's also very touch and go. Things change, constantly, which is why, I'm hesitant to call out wrong reports, but,
but if you know something and someone's getting something wrong, and people need to know.
Totally. There's definitely so the report came out yesterday morning, right? That I think then it became 6 Pac-12 schools were in deep discussions with the Big 12. Right. And listen, I think it's safe to say that every Pac-12 athletic director or president has probably held conversations with many of their Big 12 colleagues. That doesn't mean that there's deep negotiations going on, though. There was a rumor that they were supposed to meet yesterday. There was no meeting scheduled. It's not even, there's literally no truth to that rumor. So, and then, obviously, like you saw today, the narrative kind of changed. It became much more ACC driven. But, the truth is I was surprised because a lot of the national media who covers the stuff, college football for me is more of a passion play, right? Like I cover the money behind sports. So on a relative scale, there's much more money in pro sports. And so I tend to follow pro sports stories. But this one obviously touches very close to home. And something that I wanted to dive into. So it's always interesting to me, like that the national guys aren't talking to the same sources. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's just what I wanted to get, just to establish. Some people are like, well, how does this guy know? He knows. I'm just going to say that he knows. Yep. Where can people find you? Social media, website? How can they read your articles, etc.?
So you can sign up for the John Wall Street newsletter, which is free on the Sportico.com website. There's a tab for newsletters at the top. You can find me on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter and certainly a big Arizona cheerleader. My handle is at Howie Longshort. You
got a lot of names, Corey.
I do. I work on a couple different names. None, of course, Corey. Of course. The amount of email I get to John is ridiculous. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. You can shoot me an email. My email is jws@JohnWallStreet. Reach out. Always happy to chat.
I remember, boy, it's been a long time when you decided to pursue this and said, I'm going to be a factor in sports business. And you did. I mean, you went out and you achieved it. And I admire you for that. And our audience definitely is paying attention to you on social media. So, Corey, thanks as always for joining Shane and I. Great info.
I appreciate it, guys. And thank you for providing the megaphone.
Thanks to Corey for joining us. I mean, great intel. And, Shane, this guy is plugged in. He gets it. And that's where, I don't know about Arizona, the SEC. I think that's crazy talk. I don't know. In my opinion, I know
it would be amazing.
It would be something that Arizona would recruit a higher caliber of players if they went to the SEC. The one thing that we didn't touch on with Corey, which I wanted to talk more about because he's referenced this on Twitter, and we'll have to have him back on at some point to do that. Do you think that some of these conferences will start kicking out schools? Like, is Vanderbilt going to get booted from the SEC? Who's going to leave? Who's going to get kicked out of the Big Ten? At some point, and we'll probably talk about that in future outings there with Corey.
What's interesting, Eric, is it's crazy to me, and Corey mentioned this, and I believe him, but it's still crazy to me that one season can make or break where you end up in a conference for the next several decades. And that's, which is kind of what he suggested, or at least I think that's what he suggested. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Like, okay, Arizona needs to do well this year. They need to win 5 or 6 games in order to boost their chances of joining the big conference. It's like, shouldn't like the last 20 or 30 years be a bigger deal, and seeing what Arizona's track record is in terms of football, which is not good overall. They've had their moments, but just, they may be up and coming now or next year, but it doesn't mean they will be in 5 years. So it's just crazy to me just how the winds change like that, but I understand what he's saying. I want to also touch, Eric, on, his sources, which again, we know they're reliable. Everyone has different sources. He's kind of got a different role from most media, so that he has different contacts. Reminds me of when I was at ABC 15 and our sports director, Craig Fooey, who used to be a coach. He didn't really come from the media world. He came from the coaching world. He was a college football coach for a lot of years. And so he knows coaches, guys who are in the NFL, who coach in the NFL now and have for a long time. And he reported he learned from people in the know close to Bruce Arians that Bruce Arians was planning on retiring as the Cardinals coach at the end of that season. And of course, he was absolutely right. But he gets raked over the coals by these journalists who don't have those sources. They have sources, but they don't have those sources, calling it fake news, that it's BS. He just wants attention, this and that. So my point is, and again, Fooey was right. Bruce Arians retired at the end of the season, and he had those sources that others didn't. Corey's kind of the same way. He's plugged in. He's plugged into some people that other journalists aren't. Some people have sources that are very good. Other people have other sources that are very good. And Corey has some that are, I won't say unique to him, but a lot of others don't have. And he has that advantage, and we're thankful that he's our friend and he's willing to share that information with us.
And I'll say this: Corey has, as he referenced, he has very good sources for the University of Arizona, and I trust him as far as that goes. I'm really interested to see how this plays out for the Wildcats. I thought for sure, if you had asked me last Friday, Where would Arizona be by the time we recorded this podcast? I would have said Big 12 100%, with no wavering. I'm shocked that the Pac-12 is even a thing, or Pac-10, whatever it is even still a thing. If I was Arizona, I said this in the first segment, I would ditch this conference. I wouldn't wait around to see if Washington and Oregon are going to stay. I'm going to the Big 12. I like what they did getting, BYU, Houston, Central Florida. I mean, getting some schools for football that are intriguing. I really think that the Big 12 in the heartland of America, maybe they can at some point, if they bring Utah and Colorado, Arizona. I don't know if they get Oregon or Washington. I still think those schools go to the Big 10. Where does Stanford go? Can you pull maybe a couple schools from the SEC that maybe just figure, hey, we want to get out of the tougher conference, go to a third big conference? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. I think the problem is to Corey's point is that, the Big 12, you can kind of call it the flyover conference. It's just that they don't have big markets. They don't have a lot of eyeballs, even though you lose OU in Texas, that's huge. And there are still some schools that are like, okay, State and Baylor, that have a good local following, but nationally, not so much. So I think that's the problem. The ACC has a lot more eyeballs week to week in terms of football. And probably other sports as well. So I think that's the problem. And that's something I hadn't really fully considered when I just assumed that Arizona was headed to the Big 12, which they still might. But I think that the long-term plan, if they can make it work with the ACC and then maybe bring in some other schools, use that as leverage to bring in some other schools down the road, maybe have some Big 12 schools join them as opposed to the other way around. I think if they can make it work, I think that would be fantastic. And I think that would be the more ideal scenario.
If Texas and Oklahoma were still remaining in the Big 12, and let's say Houston, BYU, Central Florida weren't, would this be a different discussion today? That would you say absolutely go to the Big 12, not even question it?
Possibly. But
I would.
Again, I think even with OU and Texas, how big are those markets? So
Texas has their own network. They're one of the biggest brands in college football.
Right. I think Texas actually, in that regard, Eric, I think even though OU's been the better team, Texas would be the bigger draw there.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the fact they have their own network. They're only what, two schools that have their own network, basically. Notre Dame in football and Texas for all sports. And think about that. You can't even compare to that. It's going to be fascinating. We're gonna have different angles to talk about every week. For now, as we record this on Wednesday night, it looks as though Arizona is going to remain in the Pac-10 or 12, whatever you want to call it. And we'll see what the next week brings us. But it was fascinating. Shane and I never saw this coming. I don't think you ever saw it coming. There were no rumors about it, which makes it all the more stunning. One more thing I want to discuss. We talked about Kylan Boswell earlier in the show. That was the good news. The bad news for Arizona athletics this past week is the softball team lost two impact performers. Charlize Palacios and Janelle Miano are entering the transfer portal. Any insight on that, Shane?
Surprised, it seemed like it kind of came out of nowhere. Palacios in particular became one of their best hitters, one of their best power hitters anyway. It was great behind the plate throughout the season. Janelle Miano, you remember the fantastic grab she made in the Mississippi State series. She made some great plays. So surprising. I mean, I guess in hindsight, you come to Arizona to play for, I believe they both came to play for Mike Andrea, and then Caitlin Lowe stepped in. So maybe they just, thought, no, well, maybe I'll go somewhere else then. If this just isn't the fit, or this isn't what I was hoping for. Who knows what the reasons are. It kind of came out of nowhere, but I did like seeing is so many Wildcats after that announcement was made. Ali Skaggs, who we had on our show when they were in OKC for the College World Series, Paige Dimler, a couple of others reaffirmed their commitment to the school and let's get it for next season. Yeah. And their top four hitters statistically are returning still next year. So it's a blow, but it's not something that they can't overcome. And again, the big thing, Eric, they got to add a star pitcher. They really do. They're not going to the College World Series if they don't add a star pitcher.
I agree with that. One thing I just want to point out about this, that for our sponsor, Ice Shaker, they signed 3 Wildcat athletes at the start back in the spring. Janelle Miano was one of them. Majon Wright was one of them. And I think Christian Young was the other on the football team. Well, at least Christian's still there.
You know what they say, Eric, in the corporate world? Opportunities. there are opportunities for more. We're going to have Chris Gronkowski on the show soon, I'm sure, and he'll talk more about what
I'd be curious.
In the future.
Yeah, what do you do? Because you just two of these players that you signed to an NIL deal.
I hope he personally goes to their homes and takes their ice shakers away. They don't deserve them anymore.
Yeah, let's do another Twitter giveaway if he gives us more to give away. But
yep.
Thanks to Corey Leff for joining us. Great info from him. Check out JohnWallStreet on Twitter and on the Sportico platform. For Shane Dale, I am Eric Cohen. A lot of crazy stuff going on in the sports world these days. Have a great week, and as always, bear down.